G'day guys, it's Tim here, just sitting at my dining room table doing a few emails, and I got an email through that I thought might interest a few of you out there tonight, so I thought, do you know what, we'll just jump straight onto the Facebook Live and talk about it. There might have been some people who have seen the article, so we'll discuss it. Essentially, it's been around in the news for the last couple of days about Altair asset manager, fund manager, Philip Parker, who basically has decided to liquidate all of his Australian share funds, and it's been getting a huge amount of traction. Okay, you know, Philip's been talking about he thinks we're in a very risky period, that we're in a bubble, and the number one reason that he talks about is relating to Australian property. So I've had a few emails just from clients and a few messages, people asking me about my thoughts on this particular subject. So I thought I'd just get on and smash them straight out. So basically, here's the first thing. All right, we've always got to keep in mind that the news websites out there, news, what is it that they actually do? They're a company, they're a business, they're out to sell a product. What is it that they sell? News websites sell advertising. Okay, so how do they sell that advertising? By getting as many clicks on their websites as possible. So you're always going to see these kind of extreme articles. I mean, this is essentially what they're referring to when they're talking about clickbait, right? So that's the first thing to know. It's an extreme article, and that's why it's getting so much traction, being pushed by so many of the news sites. And of course, when people see something that extreme, they click on it, these things become the most viewed. So now let's actually get into the crux of the email itself. So Philip Parker, basically, and Altair Asset Management, what they're doing is they're cashing in. Okay. Now, two of the reasons that they said was, firstly, they're worried about a property bubble, and then the second thing is they've said primarily that they just can't find value in Australian equities. So the Australian equities ones is a pretty simple one, so we can get rid of that pretty quickly. Okay, so what they're saying is this: there's no value to be found in Australian shares. Okay, so what they mean by value is this: is they're looking for shares and equities that are considered undervalued that they can buy into and then make a profit once the market starts to realise the values in those particular shares. Okay, so essentially, what he's saying is that the Australian share market has gone from being a place where there was a lot of undervalued shares, and those now the undervaluedness, as you might say, it's probably not a word, but has disappeared. Okay, so that's a pretty easy one. So that's not a bad thing at all. There may be less value for them to find, but it means the Australian share market is actually returning to the place where it should be. In terms of property, and it's, once again, it's a topic that we see people talking about, housing bubble here in Australia. The one thing that we've got to bring it back to straight away is the simple fact that, you know, Australia is a country with many cities, and these cities are all operating on different economic cycles. And primarily what Altair are talking about is the situation in the Sydney market. Now, to some extent, you could actually say that there is a bubble in Sydney. And in fact, this is what happens throughout all economic cycles. You go from a period where there's high demand, low supply, it pushes prices. Then what happens is you get a bit of a frenzy in the market. It's what we refer to as the winner's curse part of the cycle, being that people are buying based on emotion, not on true value. That is what's happened in Sydney. Now that the demand is reduced and there's going to be an oversupply, I mean, what happens in these markets is when it becomes profitable to in the market, developers will then develop trying to secure that profit. So of course, all these developers get into the market, building lots of apartment developments. You then see an oversupply of housing onto the market, and this causes then what you might call a bubble or a correction. I mean, these are extreme terms to use. Essentially, when the market comes off its peak and it comes back and it corrects, you might say, and balances. Now, a lot of the time when we see the big corrections, we only see a maximum of around about 12% here in Australia. And we're not at that stage yet in the cycle. So we will probably see that the prices temper in Sydney, but we're talking about Sydney and not the rest of the country. We're nowhere near bubbles. You've probably got a good argument for Melbourne, or I think there probably is. There's still a little bit of room to grow for Melbourne, but certainly when you're talking about the other Sydneys, the main ones obviously being Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide. Now, the other thing is this, you know, he does refer to something along the lines of a calamitous situation. He talks about debt levels. There was a Facebook Live I did a couple of weeks back, which talked about, like, we're not heading for some impending crash. The only time, and if you look back at the global economic cycles all the way back to even prior to the 1800s, the only time that we've seen crashes like that is when we've been way over leveraged. Now, a lot of people could say we are over leveraged at the moment. We have record levels of debt. The thing that you've got to keep in mind, though, is we also have record asset values. So in fact, in terms of our debt compared to our asset levels, you're only talking around about 25%. If we narrow it down, in particular to property, well, we actually have the highest equity levels. Australian homeowners have the highest equity levels that we've seen in over 20 years, with an average LVR of 54%. Now, of course, the conditions for these kind of bubbles is when there's changes in economic conditions and people don't have the equity to absorb those changes. When people are only really, as an average, leveraged to 54%, they got plenty of room. So there's no way that we're ever going to have those kind of crashes that they're talking about. Once again, probably the hardest part for most investors is actually being able to sort the real news out from all the fake, tabloid, dramatic articles that we see. That's pretty much my view on this. If you want to find out more particularly about where we're at in the economic cycles, then there's other Facebook Lives where I've talked about them in way more detail. Or you can ask questions, if you guys want me to go through it again, I'm more than happy to do that. I wasn't planning on doing that tonight. I just wanted to get onto a quick Facebook Live and just talk about that particular article. Look, if anyone has any more questions about that article, post comments down below. I'm more than happy to come back and answer them for you. Apart from that, guys, enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a lot.